So I would like to welcome you all to tonight's event. My name is Mel Brown and I'm the Sustainability Librarian at Hobsons Bay Libraries. I would like to acknowledge that wherever we are, we live, we work and we play on Aboriginal land. My life is lived in Annum on the lands of the peoples of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to elders, past, present and emerging, and extend that to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples that may be present here tonight. Aboriginal sovereignty of this land was never ceded, and the impact of colonisation is ongoing. I spend my workdays looking out to the bay on the lands of the Bunurong, and I follow the bends of the Corroate Creek to my home on Wurundjeri country. As I walk this land today, I do so knowing that this country has been walked and cared for millennia before me, and I open myself to hear those stories, those full of joy, wisdom and wonder, but also those of horror, sorrow, heartbreak and loss. I embrace the culture and wisdom of my home and walk alongside my Indigenous brothers and sisters to a fairer Australia. If you could join me tonight in paying respects to those Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders' lands that we joined from. So we'd like to thank you for joining us for tonight's event. We are going to be encouraging everyone to put their cameras on if they'd like to, but we will be keeping microphones muted just so we don't have any background sound. But if you have questions, very much would love for you to turn your microphones and your cameras on so that you can ask your question, have a chat and have this a really interactive event tonight. So this event is being brought to you today by Hobsons Bay Libraries and the Enviro Centre. Just a very quick library update for you. We're currently open for click and collect for books and for printing, Monday to Friday 10 till 4 and our normal weekend opening hours. And our phone lines are also still available Monday to Friday 9 till 5 and normal weekend opening hours. One other little bit of information, Newport branch is currently closed whilst it's being utilised by DHHS as a vaccination centre. So if you are if Newport's your normal branch to pick up books from, you will just need to request to pick up your books from one of our other branches. So just keep that in mind. So tonight we're being joined by Jade Miles. Jade with her husband Charlie Showers run Black Barn Farm, a biodiverse orchard, nursery and workshop space in northeast Victoria. The farm is a magnet for visitors to learn about permaculture and homesteading. And Jade co-hosts a weekly Futuresteading podcast, which I know some of you out there listen to, with Katie Payne. She's active in the media about living regeneratively, hosts school programs and sits on a number of boards, all in the name of reconnecting us to nature, food and a simpler existence. She's the author of this great new book. If you haven't picked it up, do so. We're actually still waiting on our copies to come into the library, but you can reserve them. So they are there. For some reason, our supplies, everything going on in the world, it's taken them a little bit longer to get the books to us, but hopefully they will be, I'm hoping they're coming in this week. So the book is Futuresteading, Live Like Tomorrow Matters, and she's here tonight to talk us through it. So we're going to have a really informal style tonight's event while we're introduced to some of the aspects of life for Jade and her family, what she's covered in her books, why she does what she does and why it is so important that we all start living like tomorrow matters. We've got lots of time for questions, so please don't be shy. If you've got a question to ask, pop it in the chat. If you don't have a microphone, I'll ask for you. Otherwise, feel free to pop your hand up or unmute yourself and jump on over. So please join me in welcoming Jade Miles.
Thank you. It's all such a strange thing when you're not in a room.
It is indeed. We can all clap.
Thank you. Lovely to see the faces I can see. And I wonder, have I met any of you before? You never quite know. We run lots and lots of workshops and I do lots of public speaking. So I'm often in places where people say, yeah, I've met you 3 or 4 times. And I think, oh, quick, remind me how I've met you before. So thank you. Thank you for having me. And I actually want to commend you on what is possibly the most impressive acknowledgement of country I've ever heard outside of events that are actually on country. So, you know, it's a rare thing and I'm impressed. Well done.
So I realised my microphone wasn't on. Thank you very much for that, Jade. I appreciate it.
So I guess, given the silence, I guess I would like to also encourage you to ask questions all the way through. I can talk until the cows come home, although I have had a fairly solid day of talking all day. So if I start to go a bit hoarse towards the end of the session, you'll know exactly what that means. And I've got a fair bit of water here to keep me going. Futuresteading is a completely made up word. And I start with that because people say to me, oh God, I was feeling so awkward and I felt like maybe I just hadn't heard of it. You haven't heard of it because no one has it. It is completely made up and by intention. Clearly, it harks back to homesteading, but I hear all the time when I run events and workshops, people say, I kind of want to live this life, but I don't have the land and I don't want to live on land. I live in the city, or I don't want to work that hard. I don't actually want to farm. I do want to live like that and understand the rhythms of a seasonal year, but I don't actually want to be that physically inclined. Or I don't actually have the skills is the other thing I hear quite a lot. And so it made me realise that everybody, depending on what's going on between their ears, has got the capacity to futurestead, because it's really about the paradigm. It's about the lens that you're looking through. It's not actually about whether you've got land or you've got the skills or you want to actually run a farm. And so I realised that homesteading as a term was actually quite narrowing, and it didn't open up to everybody, no matter where you're living, whether it's in an apartment in the city or on acres or in the suburbs. You actually have the ability to live like this. It also is really deeply steeped in permaculture. And I was a permy kid, and we practice using the framework of permaculture in the way we live here at Black Barn Farm. But again, I realised that permaculture to lots of people wasn't terribly clear, or it was a way of life that people had a misunderstanding of or had an aversion to. And so what I realised was that while permaculture is about creating a permanent culture, it actually didn't necessarily appeal to everybody because of preconceived ideas. And so this concept of futuresteading is about creating a steady or stable future through the actions that we take. And that's why the tagline is living like tomorrow matters. And so I knew I was going to write a book because I knew I had to start writing down the things that people were asking me for. And I was doing that informally all the time at events anyway. But what I didn't know was that I was going to start a podcast that would then go gangbusters with an amazing buddy by my side and with an incredible range or lineup of individuals just doing the most unbelievable things. And so we've had this beautiful journey as it slowly unfolded, where futuresteading was a bit of a cooked up concept in my mind, but it has fully come to life right before our very eyes through the community that's been created through the book and through the events and through the podcast. I can talk about this until the cows come home, so I would love for you guys to interrupt me as I go so that I can make sure I'm talking or responding to the questions that you have got. Essentially, futuresteading doesn't have any rules, but it certainly has pillars. And it was really important to me that there was a bit of a structure around when people said, tell me what futuresteading actually is. I wanted to be able to give a little bit more than I've just given to you now. And so I've created 7 pillars, and I'll go through them really quickly because it's a really good way of introducing all the principles. Of introducing exactly what it looks like. And hopefully as I'm speaking, it won't matter that the book is all about my farm and my way of life here. It will be more about how you can actually interpret it for the way that you live and where you're at in your transition. Meeting Mother Nature. And when I say meet Mother Nature, I don't mean that you need to go and live in a tent, although I would advocate for that. There's something pretty special about pitching a tent and getting your hands in amongst it and just being back in the rhythm of the natural world. But it's about bringing your awareness back to the infinite potential of a connected existence. And it's looking around and it's mirroring what's going on outside. And it's getting your kids familiar with the language and the way in which the natural world works so that it's not a foreign place. And it's about making sure that it's not a foreign place for you as well. It's about celebrating simple, so giving yourself space to breathe and to really see, hear and feel abundance. Having less allows you to appreciate the value of what sits in your hands and your heart. So it's about stripping back the white noise. We live in a world where we are bombarded every single day by all manner of messaging. And generally, when you strip it back and you really analyse it, the messaging that's coming to us is coming to us on platforms that are highly curated and mostly highly controlled by very few who are largely feeding the paradigm of growth. And so what we're trying to do is push back on that and strip out the white noise of being told that we need to be bigger and more and glossier and shinier and endlessly growing, and actually acknowledging that the really simple things is where the magic sits. But that is actually a bit of an act of rebellion in its own sake, in its own way, because, you know, we're kind of not created, or the system is not created to actually accept that we want to push back on that and we don't want for more. We actually want to downsize and we actually want to actively strip back and simplify. So giving yourself the space to breathe. Making your place, and I remember when I pitched this to the publisher, she said, making your place just creating a beautiful home. I was like, no, it's so much more than that. It's so much more than a mark on the map, and it's so much more than the way you choose to decorate your space. It's about that deep, deep connection and that sense of belonging and that sense of obligation that comes from having your community around you and understanding the rhythm of the seasons that are in your region, and developing a rhythm that is around growing food, and, you know, finding your deeper sense of belonging that enables curiosity and commitment to your people, yourself, and your culture. And I think when you feel like you really belong, your ability to then contribute to the fabric, the tapestry that is your culture and is your place, you start to see what it's really all about. To seek ritual, and this might be one of my most favourite, and it's certainly something that often when people pick up a book that is similar to this, like Grown and Gathered or Hannah Maloney's recent one, or Milkwoods, they are all incredible books, but none of them touch on ritual. They touch a little bit on rhythm, and I think that would be one of my key outtakes of Futuresteading, is that building your own rhythm to suit you is the most important thing. But ritual is my favourite component of Futuresteading, because it can be as simple as a cup of tea that you start your day with every single day before everybody else wakes up and while you listen to the bird song in the mornings. But it equally could be those big rituals that hold us all, not just as individuals and not just as families, but as communities and as an entire culture. It might be that it's seasonal rituals. We hold a mid-winter wassail every year where we do a massive bonfire, and it's the middle of winter, so it's not our big extended group of friends. It's our more intimate crew, and we all dress up, and some people put face paint on, and we all wear crazy hats and long cloaks and animal skins, and we all look a bit pagan, but the kids run around dressed up as ghouls, and we chant, we drink cider and we chant, and we throw toast, and we light a bonfire, and some years that goes off with a bang, and some years it's a complete disaster because we're in the middle of winter and it's freezing up here and it doesn't go. But, that marks the guts of the year. It marks the deepest, most internalized, reflective time of year that any of us have, and you come out of hibernation just for an evening while the kids run around like crazy things in the freezing cold conditions we have here. And we have a potluck dinner with our friends, and it really reminds us that we're going through a deep hibernation period where it's internal and reflective and restful, but we actually have a beautiful tribe of people that are around us. And so rituals can be really big and they can be really small. And I was doing an interview the other day and someone said, is a ritual just making a habit conscientiously or with considered thought? I was like, yeah, okay. So I took a really long time to curate whatever it says in here. But actually I could have just said that. He kind of nailed it. The next one is creating your clans. And this isn't just about, having a really big circle of friends. And in fact, as I've got older, my circle of friends has got smaller and smaller and smaller. And I interviewed my brother on the podcast last week, and he was like, no, you know everybody, and your network is massive. I was like, no, it's really, really not. It's actually getting smaller as I get older. But creating clans is about acknowledging that we're only as strong as the community that we belong to. And, you know, they're an extension of us. And, you know, they allow for an ability to create unison, hand in hand, heart to heart. And it favours collectivism over individualism. And it's really the way in which you contribute to the sum of those parts. And that, again, can be really tiny things. It can be sharing the abundance of eggs that you've got. In fact, that reminds me, my coat pocket is filled with eggs. Don't squash it. Hopefully a family member, hopefully someone just heard me say that. I just came out of the chicken pen. I ran up before I came with you all, and I put my coat over there, and it is truly filled. We're getting about 30 eggs a day. So hopefully they won't sit on it. So yeah, it's about making sure, you know, it could just be delivering extra eggs to friends. It could be, you know, rallying behind someone who's having a really, really hard time and making sure that there's other friends who are doing a meal plan or a food drop-off, or cleaning their house, or filling their house with fresh flowers, or whatever it might be. It might be actively getting together with another group of people and building a food co-op, or a toy library, or a tool library, or a street corner seed swap, or whatever it might be that works for you in your community. It's about actively getting involved in it and then staying with it. Because, and I talk about this say-do cap thing all the time, and my husband challenges me on this regularly, but it's the reality of living in the world that we live in. We often have these values, and we have a desire in a way in which we want to live. But the reality of wanting to live in pure alignment with our values all the time is really bloody hard, and it's really important to acknowledge that it's hard. And so sometimes you feel a bit hypocritical. You feel like everything that I've put in this book, like when I was writing this book, I remember saying to Charlie, God, I'm so busy writing the darn book. I wish I could actually just go on Futurestead. I actually haven't got time to Futurestead because I'm too busy writing a book. Like, yeah, well, you can't be all things to all people all the time. And I say somewhere in the book that, you know, it's jam-packed with ways in which you could live, but it's unrealistic to think that all of the things that are being done or mentioned in this book are being done all of the time. And so, you know, it took me a childhood and then a little bit of rebellion into adulthood and pushing back on hippie parents, thinking they were the last thing I ever wanted to be like. And then, you know, it took me my first out-of-home experience to realise that actually it's kind of cool, and I think I'll bring some pots in and grow my own food because, one, it saves me money, and two, I think I need my hands back in the dirt. But it took me till I was about 22 to really realise that this actually is how I wanted to live. But then it really took me probably 10 or 15 years to develop a rhythm and a cycle and a skill set that would allow me the ability to feed my family with food that I've grown, from seeds that I've saved, from chickens that I've hatched, you know, from land that I understand and that I'm regeneratively applying practices to. And so it's slow. It's really slow. And there are some days where I think, oh, we haven't actually got time to be slow. We all need to be doing all of the things all of the time. And inevitably within an hour, I'm in a bit of a state, and Charlie will say, well, that didn't help anything or anyone. And so how about we go for a walk? It's like walking the dog. He says, you're often like walking the dog. I need to take you out for a walk just to take a big, deep breath, recalibrate, dig a hole, put your hands in the flowing stream, and just remember that you're just doing your best, and that's all anybody can do. And so none of that is news to anyone, but it's kind of important to reiterate. Saluting the seasons, and this kind of feels like it should be intuitive, but the reality is that the world that we live in nullifies and numbs us to the realities of the seasons, because we mostly live in air-conditioned environments, air-conditioned cars, air-conditioned houses, air-conditioned office spaces, and we can buy whatever food we want whenever we want for the price that we're willing to pay. And the reality of that is that it completely disconnects you from what's going on in the outside world, and it builds an expectation of not having to dress practically or reframe the way we want to spend our day, or what we actually want to do with ourselves, or what decisions we make. And so really that's about noticing it. Sometimes it's a really tiny, subtle difference. Sometimes it's noticing that when you go out in the mornings, you don't actually need to put your jacket on to walk the block. Or when you walk past the puddles, they're no longer frozen. And you think, oh, when did that happen? Only last week I was knocking the ice off the top of the buckets at the chook pen, and today I'm not. Or like at the moment, this morning I went to feed the chickens and their water, turned the tap on and went, how the hell can I be in the middle of September and I still can't give the chickens water in the morning because all the taps are frozen? What's with that? So, you know, and I know that in about a week's time I'll go to do it and it'll just come out. And if I'm not really actively noticing, it may just go unnoticed, and that would be a real shame not to be able to acknowledge that. Someone has said here, what are some of the first steps for future steading for someone who perhaps didn't grow up with permaculture or farming skills experience? I get asked this question all the time because it can be a bit daunting. Like the start of the book, the first maybe 25 pages, and really I've tried to condense that into a couple of key pages about what the hell's going wrong with the world. And that's a bit overwhelming. I've tried not to be overwhelming. I made it pretty. I don't know if you can see that. But, you know, it's one big graphic with lots of little bullet points all the way around it. Because I think we know future steading is important because we know when things like the IPCC report comes out, we're facing, you know, catalytic or catastrophe, and if things don't change rapidly, then, and we're in charge of that. And I think actually I've skipped a bit in telling you part of my story before I come back to you, Chi. This came about, this book, because I have been the wife of a firefighter for a long time, for about 15 years. And so our summers, you know, my summer childhoods, those magical long hot days with lots and lots of people around and lots of picnicking and twilight swims and early morning walks, the magic of that memory has slowly become a bit more eroded as our summers in my world have become more impacted by climate change. The food that we grow is impacted. Our ability to, you know, manage stock is impacted. Our summers as a family are impacted because often Charlie is off at fires. But last year, 2019, 2020, saw for the first time in my mind a bit of a dawning, a bit of a reckoning, or a bit of an awakening, and certainly a galvanisation of our country, because our city cousins started to acknowledge, maybe for the first time for many, what regional people are experiencing almost yearly, because those summers are now so difficult to manage, and fires, if you are involved in fires are, they're scary and they're impacting not only to business but also to resilience and to well-being. And last year there were a couple of incidents that occurred that my husband was involved in, and he I didn't really know what they were at the time, but he definitely came back quite different. And it was a really hard summer. He was away for a long time. He has a number of fire roles, so even when the flames stopped flaming, he was then in the next role and the next role. So he had a really long, hot, hard summer. And as I watched the country galvanise and start to cry for answers, what I heard was they need to fix this and this needs to change, and you know, they need to solve the problem. And I didn't know who the royal they was, and I fully acknowledge that we need policy change and we need acknowledgement of climate impact at a level from our leaders. But I also think, and this is why I wrote the book, I also think that actually governments are led. They have always been led. And it is our place to lead them, because we are the people, and the louder we speak through our actions, the more inclined they are to take notice of us. And so I also realise that we have a huge amount of lobby pressure that comes from industries that we don't necessarily as individuals have the ability to change. But we are still the voting public, and we have got the ability to push for policy change and push for leadership in a different direction. But we've actually got to own the fact that the decisions that we make in our own lives need to change. And that's where that reckoning comes in. We need to reckon with the reality of what we're facing and we need to acknowledge that endless consumption and endless growth isn't actually serving what our greater desires are, and it therefore won't serve the purpose of pushing government to change. So all of these tiny individual actions that are taken by so many of us have the ability to build that waterfall that has the ability to make change. The other thing that it has the ability to do is to soothe and to calm that eco-anxiety that is rising up in all of us with every new report that comes out or every new news article that we absorb. And that can be crippling. I know myself, we went through, I don't know if anybody else in the room can acknowledge or recognise this, but we went through a couple of years of thinking, what's the point anyway? Like, why do anything? Or why engage with others? Because I can't face other humans. I'm so disillusioned by humans and the actions that we do or don't take, or the way in which we live. And for a long time there, a book used to arrive every other week, and Charlie hates me telling this story and he can hear me right now, but it used to arrive every week, and I used to say, oh, another end of the world book has arrived. That's great. That's really going to soothe us. That's really going to give us the action, but kick up the bum that we need. And then suddenly the books that were arriving weren't quite so gloomy, and they were really quite action oriented and systemic. You know, they were outlining what systems needed to change, not just what needed to happen on a day-to-day level between you and I, but what systemic changes needed to occur. And ultimately, the more we read, the more we felt assured that we are in for a really big period of adaptation and transition. And so what we need to do is make sure that we've got really strong communities around us, because we're as strong as those that are around us, that we've got the skills to adapt to a world that is rapidly changing, and that we really needed to find a way in order to empower ourselves and take agency, find the right words, find the right ways to connect to other people, find the ways to share skills, find the ways to create a sense of stability in complete cohesion with the country that we're on. It doesn't really matter where you are, but knowing where your water comes from, knowing where your food comes from. So this kind of goes back to your question, Chi, how do we begin? Begin by asking questions. Begin by giving yourself time to ask questions and to observe, and to reframe practices and to reframe rituals and habits and rhythms. Begin by reading, and begin by finding solidarity, because if you're in a place where you feel like the overwhelm of it is so daunting that you can't put one foot in front of the other, well, that doesn't help anyone, least of all you. And so I would argue that Charlie's now trying to rally kids for dinner. I would argue that the best place to start is in a place that reflects you, where you're at, the community that you're in, the knowledge that you're seeking, and the change that you can actively make yourself. Because then you feel like you can put one foot in front of the other. And there is this cathartic thing that happens when you start to do and not just ponder and not just be overwhelmed by endlessly reading, but doing, that really, really fills your cup and makes you feel like you can do more. So yeah, I guess the direct response to that would be start where you're at with what you've got, and be gentle and keep checking back in.
Jade, just before we go on, you've mentioned the IPCC report, so the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report, which came out just a few weeks before your book did. So perfect timing for
it
this
came out
book
the same
to come
week
out.
of, actually.
The same, there you go. As I was reading the book, it got me thinking about how you went about getting this published. Was there did the publishers, editors ever push back on you covering that in, because it's been, you've covered it so beautifully, and I just wanted to know Like, it's because it does tackle a topic that a lot of the books similar to this don't, whether you had any issues there with the publishers, editors, or were they on board right from the start?
No, my publisher is incredible, actually. I had 3 publishers all vying for the book, and so it was an enviable position to be in. But actually, it was one of the hardest decisions I made of the whole process, working out which one to go with. And in the end, I went with the one who, one, had faith in me and my knowledge of my audience, who, and I don't know if it's reflected in this group, but generally they're females. Generally, they are 35 to 55. Generally, they've made quite a lot of changes in their lives already towards living a little bit more like this wherever they are. And generally, they have got the ability to straddle that. It's an incredible capacity, and I feel like everywhere I go, I'm meeting people who've got this capacity to know what a day-to-day existence looks like and how you can make that look in a practical sense, but also hold on to this really clear big picture system view of what needs to change. And so, and that the tightrope of navigating between the two. And some people are obviously more top-down oriented and some people are more grassroots. But I would argue that nearly everybody that engages with me through my book or through the pod are a little bit of both. It's a pretty magic personality trait to be able to straddle both of those spheres comfortably. They didn't. They were amazing. I did say to her, look, I acknowledge that there's a bit in here that could be political, but I'll be really particular with my language so that it's not polarizing, because I don't think polarization is, I think that's actually one of the biggest problems we're facing right now, is that we aren't willing to tackle the really hard topics because they're the bloody topics we need to be tackling. We need to have these conversations and we need to have them respectfully and openly and factually and emotionally. We need to tap into our emotional intelligence and we need to tap into our ability to acknowledge that everyone you have a conversation with is a human. And so I was pretty strong in saying, these are the topics I'm going to tackle, but I need you to have faith in my ability to use language that doesn't polarize and doesn't create teams and parties. The other thing was that ritual was a bit contentious because ritual can be a bit spiritual and woo-woo. And I said, I'll be a bit careful with how and I probably would have gone a bit deeper if she hadn't advised me to be a bit gentle with that. So in the end, I went with Murdoch, and I went with Murdoch because they have got the biggest capacity for distribution. So it's been accepted in the USA, in France, in Germany, and in the UK. And I knew that from the get-go. When they took me on, they also pitched me into their international distribution houses or other publishing houses. And I knew from the get-go that if I was going to put this together, I wanted as many people to get it into the hands of as many people as possible. And I wanted to be able to have these conversations fairly gently. I haven't actually gone at this like a bull at a gate. There are some incredible writers out there like Charles Eisenstein and of course, I can't think of them off the top of my head now. I've got a massive library sitting just there. I'll duck around in a second and tell you which books I would recommend. But I actively wanted to be gentler than that, because I also think that if you go in really hard with language that is too academic or too intellectual or too alienating and isn't a story, I think storytellers are the answer to most things. Then people disengage and they don't want the facts shoved down their throat in a bleak way. I've got plenty of those books too. I wanted a book that still felt joyous and that still felt nourishing and that still felt hopeful. I think all of those things are really important. And so someone has said, what are your references when writing this book? So most of the book is through lived experience, and that was another thing I was really careful to do. I have to say maybe everything. I don't know that there's much in here at all that isn't my lived experience. And so that also then comes into, you start to question the pure truth of everything that I've shared. So the skills that I've shared in the second half of the book, or the last 6 chapters, which are the 6 seasons that I've identified, which are the growing seasons around Victoria and especially here, are true to me, and I can vouch wholeheartedly, hand on heart, lie in bed straight at night, knowing that everything that I've put in here is truly true for me. But that's not to say that, if you keep corn seeds for 6 years and then they don't strike, that I've got that wrong. It just means that I, at times, have kept corn seeds for 6 years and they've still taken. So most of it in here is lived experience. All of the quotes are true quotes that have come from people who I've interviewed. At the very beginning, where I did show you that picture of the globe before, where I talk about it being a sobering reality and why Futuresteading is so important, they all came out of publications that I've been, I say, presenting in public environments for the last 10 or more years through my work with local food activism and local food system development. So nearly all of them come out of academic research papers or similar. And of course, I've got a library of books that I use incessantly, and they're at the back of the book. So I have a whole, look, that's actually a photo of my library. I don't know if you can see that, but rather than me dragging you around the house, doesn't do a very good job of it, does it? It seems quite blurry. But I have a whole section in the back of the book that says these are the books that I have found to be invaluable over the last couple of years. And so if you're looking for books on upskilling for resilience, I would refer to these. If you need to build your knowledge of foundational systems, I would refer to these. If you're keen to learn more about herbal medicine, if you're seeking inspiration to connect more deeply with your natural world, if you want to create more ritual, if you're eager to know more about the power of a regenerative food system. So they are all books. Some, in fact, many of which are written by people who I have met in person through the work that I do or workshops that I run, or that I have attended in Australia and overseas. And so there's a whole reference library in there for you to flick through.
And I'm just going to point out that I think probably at least 85% of those books are in the Enviro Centre collection, so you can jump on our catalogue and reserve them.
Good on you. Aren't you a gem? Lots of the books that I've got in there are through, what's the name of the publishing house? They're in Vermont. Charlie, what's the name of the publishing house that produces most of our books? He can't think either. Chelsea Green. They're a Vermont based.
I was just about to say Chelsea Green.
Yeah.
I thought that might have been the one you were talking. Yeah, they're great.
They're
great.
Amazing. Yeah. There was another question there. Are there days that you question your decision to go on Futuresteading when things get tough? Oh my God, of course there are. I would love to say no, that everything about this way of life is incredible. I will caveat that by saying maybe the Futuresteading component, once you've found a beautiful rhythm, is really doable. But over the top of that, we have then, as a family, have made the decision to also scale up and to become commercial orchardists and berry producers, which is done on a small scale. So Black Barn Farm is only 22 acres, and half of that is planted out to heritage fruit trees and berries that will one day be open for pick your own. In fact, probably in about January. We're just almost, if you follow us on Instagram, you'll know that we are almost at the point where our Black Barn, which is what our business is named after, is almost finished being built. So at the moment we run a whole heap of workshops, mostly for adults, for upskilling. So things like wicking bed and seed saving and Futuresteading and grafting and weaving. We run all of those very seasonally oriented workshops, but we also run schools programs, and we do all that in our packing shed. It will soon be moved to the Black Barn. But that's because we are really deeply committed to making sure that there are as many skills in our community as possible, and our kids, the school kids that we have come through, that is a benevolent gift There's no money in that process. That is purely because we want the community, the next generation of kids that are coming into the world in our community, to really, really understand food sovereignty and to really understand, what food provenance means and be food literate and be a little bit interested in maybe going into agriculture. And in the area that we're in, we're surrounded we're on a plateau that has 4 and 5 generation farmers around us, mostly apple, cherry and chestnut farmers. But, when we got here, there were 20 or so family farms. Not much earlier than that, there were up to 35, and we're now down to just 3. So we are in a community that is desperately in need of small-scale agriculture to be rebirthed. And so we're kind of on the front foot with that, mostly to the concerned frowns of the old school farmers who wonder what the hell we're doing when we have inter-row plantings and why we're having a crack at something on such a small scale and why we're going direct to consumers, because it'll just exhaust us. And, but what we're trying to create is a living, breathing example of small-scale family-owned farming viability, because it's at the crux of our ability to feed ourselves. It's at the crux of our ability to give land access to those who do want to farm. It's at the crux of our ability to take back some of that food sovereignty that at the moment is largely dominated by, 10 or 11 organisations that are global. They don't give a damn when they're sitting around their boardroom about the tiny regional communities that are having their guts ripped out of them because monoculture now dominates and scale now dominates. So what we're trying to do is prove, I guess, over a very long period of time, and by that I mean multi generations probably, that small-scale family-owned farms are not only viable but absolutely vital to regional communities and have the capacity to feed the country. And so we don't know what that looks like. We're trying to enjoy the process as we go. But to your question, I can't think who asked that, but it was a few questions ago. It's exhausting. So there are definitely days where we think, like today I have spent 8 solid hours working off farm. I'm the National Fund Manager or the National Program Manager for the Sustainable Table Regenerative Farming Fund, which is a philanthropic fund that puts money out to what we see as change-making levers in the regenerative farming system. So that is my off-farm job because I need to pay the bills for an establishing orchard that it takes 10 years to establish. And so, we're only 6 years into that 10-year establishment phase and the bills are big. So yes, in answer to your question, do I ever get exhausted? Yes, I do. Without doubt, often. And in fact, if I'm really honest, I got quite sick a number of years ago, which is what really, really exacerbated my need and desire to land what I call this way of life so that I stopped having to justify the way I live to people who thought I was crazy. But also, not everybody needs to build a farm and not everybody needs to be educating as well. I think the over-ambitious decision to take on so many things is probably to a fault and has impacted my health. So there are definitely days where I wonder what I'm doing. But when I push all of that back on Charlie, because he's sort of in essence the farmer, I could not imagine a more rewarding, it's physically tiring, but it is a really beautiful, beautiful way to live. And when you're in rhythm with all of that, it doesn't feel like work at all. You feel alive, you feel vibrant, you feel healthy, you feel deeply connected to place and to your people. Yeah. The next question that you've got up there is one that I also get asked all the time, which is any tips on getting family, partners and teens on board the Futuresteading train? Yes, there are lots, and I would say go gently. I would say let them lead it as much as you do. And really little things like encouraging a different person every day to wander outside and see what they find and bring it in to sit at the centre of the dinner table to then be able to talk about it and really just connect with some of those really tiny things. It might be, you know, budding blossom, which is out right now. It might be lichen on a tree that you found in the middle of winter. It might be daffodils that you found, or it might be, you know, weeds that you've plucked or picked, or, you know, the really fun things are the things that get the kids across the line. Open fires, a sausage, nothing more than a sausage for dinner in bread with an open fire in the backyard in an old 44-gallon drum is pretty bloody hard to beat. And it's simple and there's no dishes and it's quick, and you can then throw something out if it's the middle of summer on the ground and look up at the stars for 15 minutes together. So those kind of things are really easy, not quite so structured. They don't feel quite so pushy. I was lucky because I started this journey with my partner at 20. We've known each other for a very long time. We met at uni, and not at any point have we ever questioned the vision that we had together, and our values are so tightly aligned that I've actually genuinely never had to navigate getting a partner on board, but I get asked it often. And I think a really good way is to do a PDC together, which is a permaculture design certificate. There are lots and lots of those online now. There are lots of dip your toe in the water equivalents of them. We run lots of Futuresteading introduction, 3-hour introduction sessions, because committing to a 12-day PDC can be a bit daunting. We've run a beautiful one, which is permaculture living, which isn't a full PDC, but it's about finding ways to adapt skills and practices within your life. Like our Futuresteading introduction goes for 3 hours. It is nearly always, we get 40 or 50 people come to each one of them, and we can host that many at once because I do a lot of the talking, and then I fill you all with goodie bags to take home, which is seeds from my garden and scobies for you to start your own what's that? Bread dough, yes. I've got the 10-year-old saying, don't forget you give them bread dough. We do. We give starters as well. We get you to bring. She does it all, so that's why she knows. You know, so she's 10. She's highly involved, so I think that's part of the appeal. But she's not yet 12 or 13 and full of hormones, so the 14-year-olds have just started to really pull away. We also had a whole lot of practices from a really young age where screens weren't a big. No worries, Sarah. Goodbye. Thank you. Where screens weren't a big part of their lives, where ritual was and being outside was, and lots of camping trips and lots of animals and lots of seed saving and lots of food growing. So they've been on that journey with us, but there is no doubt I would be lying if I said they are still squarely with us. They are pulling away, and I would kind of expect that. I want them to challenge us. I want them to think for themselves. I want them to look outside our box. But equally, I want to continue to give them really strong, robust ritual and process that holds them and encourages them to be curious, encourages them to be outside and in connection with what's going on out there, and to really seek it. And they both seek it in completely different ways. One seeks it for physicality, and one seeks it for relaxation and peace of mind. One's more prone to anxiety and one isn't, and so they seek the natural world for really different reasons. What else have just looking at any other questions that have been asked here. There was actually one more principle that I didn't go through before either, and that was to love local. And I refer to that as a spiral that begins with the individual and coils outwards with those closest to you receiving the most energy, love and attention. The community that builds is bound by mutual trust, obligation and reciprocity that empowers all. And I think the thing that I would say to that is to not only love local and have this kind of vague idea that you'd like it to be vibrant, but to actively get involved. So don't just join your food co-op. Actually shop there, even if it feels a little bit inconvenient because they don't always have the stock, and because they don't always, you know, there's volunteers putting the sales through, so it can take a little bit longer than the supermarket. Actively get involved and build your rituals and your habits around your local community. So what are the local events that are being hosted? The fact that you're all at this is fantastic. So clearly there's already that sense in place, but actively get involved. Consider your local high school over a more swanky one further away. And then if it's not quite what you want it to be, get on the board or get on the parents committee or get on the fundraising group or whatever it is, get involved and actually make it what you want to see it become, because it won't become that if you wait for someone else to do it. Everybody else will just go to where there is something shinier and glossier. The other thing I haven't talked about is the fact that I have broken the year into 6. So I've broken the year not into just the 4 seasons that we're used to, but into the 6 seasons that I tend to run my growing year to. And that starts with the awakening. And I'm right in that right now. I suspect down in Melbourne, you guys are a little bit ahead of me, but I'm just at the point where I've still got frost, pretty heavy frost on the ground in the mornings. As I said when I first started, I'm still struggling to feed the chickens water in the mornings because it's still too cold. But, you know, there's blossom out and the buds are just starting to swell and just starting to burst. The pardalotes are back. They come around my birthday in the middle of August every year, and we listen to them cheeping endlessly as they do their little mating dance together, and then we see babies. You know, the asparagus is just starting to push through the beds, or all of the things in our perennial bed, and I talk about perennial planting in here. Over annual planting, because it gives you a much longer growing season, and you know you can nurture from the top and not have to turn over your soil every year and replace, but you know, get earlier food and often a whole different range of food. So you know the asparagus is just starting to push through and it's just starting to warm up a bit. So that's the awakening, and you're starting to consider that you're coming out of this hibernation period, and then you go into alive, and you know that period where everything is verdant green and tumbling out of the trees. All the leaves are on top of each other and everything is just growing faster than you can watch it. That's alive. And then you move into high heat, where you start to top and tail your day a bit. Your mornings are quite busy while you water animals and water veggie gardens and check in on what's growing and what's not. The middle of the day is super hot, so you're often tucked away. And then the end of the day, you're back out maybe with friends at the lake or at the river or at the local park or whatever it might be. And then you move into harvest, which is pretty self-explanatory, and things are coming off out of the veggie patch so thick and so fast that you can barely keep up with the dehydration or bottling of them or eating of them or sharing of them. And then you move into the turning, where the nights are cold and you might light your fires again, and you kind of know that it's time to start to tuck back down, and you stop being quite so social and you start to turn a bit more inward, and you build ritual around this, and you put all your veggie beds to bed, and then you move into deep chill, which is that deep period of hibernation. So they're the 6 seasons, and within those 6 seasons I have outlined ways in which you can grow, create, nourish, feast, and have ritual. And so there are all these different activities across all the different seasons that you get talked through in fair detail, so that you can start to build some of those habits and practices yourself. What sorts of rituals do you practice? Well, Michelle, thank you. Great question. I start every single day. Well, we start every single day pretty early. My husband is a really, really early bird, so it's not unusual for him to have his head in a book or some kind of research paper by 4:30. I'm not quite that early, but I definitely am nudged awake at about that hour, so I start to ponder what the day might look like. Generally, I get up at about 5:30 and go for a walk. There's not many days where I don't go for a walk, no matter what the weather. I just change the outfit. And I'm really lucky because I can head straight into the bush, and it totally recalibrates me. It humbles me, makes me realise how insignificant I am, allows me to listen. Actually, this morning I was trying to listen to a podcast about rebuilding culture and connection to the natural world, and I was getting so frustrated. I was in the bush and it kept dropping out, and I was thinking, this is ridiculous. I'm trying to listen rather than actually be in the bush. It's not actually working. Like, it's not lost on me that I should just turn the bloody thing off and actually be in the bush. And so I did. In the end, I thought, okay, this is really the greater world telling me something. I'll pull my earbuds out, and the bird life was amazing. And so that I was like, yeah, what was I even trying to do? Listen to a podcast, in the bush. I'm in the ultimate setting. And then I come back and have a cup of tea. And that for me is a real ritual because I choose the cup, and generally my cups have either been handmade by friends or by me or by kids, or I've found them in funny, odd op shops in places that remind me of a trip I went on or something. So I choose the cup depending on the mood I'm in. And I also, as ridiculous as it is, I choose the pot as well based on the same thing. I collected them from generally op shops all over the place. And then, of course, I choose the leaf. And so I dry all my own leaves, and I choose the leaf that I'm in the mood for. Sometimes it's a bit citrusy, or sometimes it's a selection of mints, or the latest thing we've got going on, and I shared that on Insta yesterday, is to do a black tea, but with a good dollop of marmalade. I hate marmalade, but I love it in tea, and it's really good. And the only reason we discovered it was because we had no other sweetening source, and my son was having a cup of tea, and he was like, oh, we've got this thing here that someone gifted us. Here, I'll just pop it in there. And I then realised that actually I shouldn't scoff at my son's desire to be odd and to challenge status quo, because actually it's bloody great. Try it. They're all my little itty-bitty rituals. I stop at least 2 or 3 times a day and breathe really deeply. And I got off the phone from Melissa after a tech check and thought, I just need to walk to the top of my hill. And I just took massive big deep breaths, walked to the top of the hill through the paddock. It was completely aimless. I just needed 10 minutes just to recalibrate and take some big deep breaths. So that I do all the time. And then we have big seasonal rituals. And we also have life rituals. So my husband and one of the twins just recently went to a men's rites of passage, which is very steeped in ritual. A rites of passage men's program where one of my sons was given the chance to leave his boyhood self behind and emerge a young man. And wow, they are powerful. I'm a woman, so I don't know what happens, but it was multi-days with multiple fathers and multiple sons and multiple fires and multiple ceremonies and lots and lots of shared experience, lived experience, and really we don't have those in our lives anymore because our lives are largely dominated by the ritual of consumption, and that's empowered us at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, but really what it's done is stripped us of our ability to honour all of the different life stages and to be held by rituals that marked and celebrated, things as simple as food production. We don't even do that anymore. So I think ritual has the ability to honour us all of our life stages, to mark the importance of life changes, to mark the importance of seasonal changes, and to really bring us back to ourselves and to our place and to our people. And I think ritual is something that is underestimated, and it's the thing that sits certainly in me, but in many others around me, in a really, really deep, yearning, primal place. And it's that hunger that we need to start feeding, because I think it's that will hold us as we navigate these rapid changes that we're about to face. Melissa, did you have any other questions you wanted to ask me before I keep going? Sort of check in.
There's no other questions in the chat that I don't think I've missed any through there. I will just let Gabby, I think it was you that asked a question earlier about what was the name of the podcast. I have put a link in the chat to Jade's podcast. It's Futuresteading, the same name as the book. And I've also been popping links as Jade's been talking about things. So there's a link to the courses at Black Barn Farm, but also a link to the Milkwood course that you mentioned as well, the online course.
Great. Okay. There's also a whole heap of reading that people can do, but it's really hard to define what people say to me all the time, where do I begin and what should the path look like? And really, in truth, only you can define that. So what I've captured is what my rhythm and my ritual looks like across a 12-month period. And some of these things in here will really resonate with you, but not all of them will, and you'll have your own equivalents that you'll drop in instead, or an idea in there might spur you to create something of your own. And so I really implore you to contemplate what your rhythm looks like. Are you a day person, a night person, a winter person, a summer person, a crowd person, a loner? Are you someone that likes space? Are you someone that likes to be cozied in amongst lots of things? Understand all of those things and acknowledge them before you start to build your rhythm, because only you can define what that needs to look like. Yeah. A question that I get asked a lot is whether I'm doing this to honour the past or whether I'm doing this to stabilise the future. And I would have to say that it's a bit of both. I was really lucky. I still have my grandmother around, and I had a really big family, and it wasn't always cohesive, but it was rambunctious and rough and tumble, and we're all in the same couple of villages, and my folks went to high school together, and they're not together anymore, but they all of their siblings did too, and they were both from quite big families. So we would have family gatherings and both sides would be present, and it was always pretty chaotic. But what it did teach me was the importance of obligation to your people, and really having to learn from an early age how to navigate some of those tricky conversations, because no one ever agrees or always agrees on everything. So it was a really good learning ground for acknowledging that we are in this, and family is important. And if your family is your chosen family, it could be your friendship group, understanding how to have those hard conversations where conflict might arise, but do it respectfully, is really, really important. And it also meant that I had a lot of people around me to teach me skills like passata making, or the difference between tomato that will turn to botulism and tomato that will explode in your pantry, which still happens to me. I exploded a tomato bottle only about a week and a half ago, and it went all over the ceiling. And tomatoes that don't do that. I learned lots of those really fundamental skills, and quite a lot of those recipes and skills are in here still. So I bring and honour the past to my children and the children who visit the farm quite intentionally, because I think a lot of those skills and those ways of life are really important, and we've lost a lot of those with the dominance of screens and the pace, the short-termism existence that we all live within now. Now, someone just said then, a tricky question. Some say sustaining yourself through growing your own food and making ferments, etc., and other practices commonly associated with permaculture are for those with privilege, access to time, energy, skills, land, etc. Yeah. Do you have insights into how transition to sustainable practices can be made more accessible? Yeah, I absolutely do. And I think if you were here, Michelle, a little bit earlier, you would have heard me talking about the juggle between my off-farm existence, which still has me squarely planted in the capitalist existence where I'm earning money to pay for the establishment of the farm. Yeah, look, I fully do, and this question gets asked often. And I think this is where I talk about enough. Defining your enough is possibly, you could argue that it's only available, you've only got the time to actually sit around and ponder what your enough is if you're privileged in the first place. And I would fully take that. I did not grow up with abundance of any sort. I had lots of family around me and I had lots of skills around me, but we did not have an abundance. We shared land because we didn't have the money to buy our own, and we shared tools because we didn't have the money to buy our own, and we shared food because we often went hungry if we didn't share. So I came from what many would see and what I felt very, very truthfully as a kid as not having enough. And perhaps that has instilled in me a sense of what's the word where you hold on to everything? Poverty mentality. So I hoard a bit. But I do know that I was given the opportunity for a good education. It was a public school education, but it was still an education, and I took that with both hands because that was impressed on me from a pretty young age. And with that, I was able to get a professional career going. And truly, without that, I wouldn't have had the capacity. And I've worked bloody hard, but I wouldn't have had the capacity to buy my land. And that is something that lots of people are not given the opportunity to have. They didn't get the opportunity for an education or a stable childhood. And mine wasn't always stable. In fact, there were big periods of it being very unstable. My dad was an artist and went away for big periods of time, and we often went with him and lived in tents, and, you know, we were encouraged to challenge the system, and he was pretty anti-authoritarian and quite difficult, to be honest. And so, you know, I know what it's like to not have enough, but I also know wholeheartedly that I am absolutely privileged, and I do come from a privileged perspective of now owning my own land where I have my own house and I'm raising my own kids in a way that I'm empowered to do so. So I do have insight, and I can relate to that, but I also understand that there are plenty of people who don't have the privilege that I have. And you said you have insights in how to transition to sustainable practices and how they can be made more accessible. The power of the people is pretty phenomenal. So when you find people who acknowledge that they have enough and that their enough is relatively simple compared to others, it also means that there is abundance, there is leftovers. And so our approach, and many around us, accept and appreciate that we have enough if we have our health and we have our kids pretty well on the straight and narrow, and if they can't come to us about an issue bugging them, they can go to one of our other pretty tightly held community. You know, there are other men who believe in ritual just like we do, and they will hold our kids as needed, and guide them when they can't come to us. The ability to grow my own food through seeds that have been gifted to me through the food co-op that I founded, because someone had an abundance of seed and so they shared it. And so then I used it and grew it. And when I had an abundance, I fed back into that. I think that circular system and that acknowledgement of enough, when your cup is full, you give to everyone who doesn't. I think it does. It sounds ideological, but I do think you can build communities. And I say that through experience. I think you can build communities through your sense of abundance. I have so many eggs right now that I'm dropping them off to everyone within Kui because I don't need them. I could put a few more in the incubator, and I will certainly do that, but I still don't need all of them. And we have chickens because our kids want to learn this cycle of life, so we continue to grow them, and that then means we have excess. And so with excess, I either take it to the food co-op and donate it, or I give it to friends and family or neighbours. So I think when you build your community and you define your enough and you align with others who have a value system that is kind of similar, it's a really opportune way to transition to sustainable practices that are more accessible. I get land access is problematic. I'm a first-gen farmer myself, so we had to flip houses, and, you know, we both worked 2 jobs, and we both lived on the smell of an oily rag, which actually means 99-cent 2-minute noodles for about 3 years. So that didn't appear in the book. But, you know, that was kind of our reality because we were working towards the goal of farming, and the only way we could buy land in a really overinflated area because it's so tourist oriented and so filled to the brim with fairly wealthy tree changers coming out of Melbourne. So, you know, you were never going to get a farming return on the cost of land in this area. But the only way we could do that was to flip houses for years, and we did 10 years of that. And so it meant we worked full time, we raised 3 kids full time, and we flipped houses on the side so that we could slowly, incrementally. It took us 20 years to put enough money in the bank to buy the farm. And so it can be done, but you have to be really bloody focused, and you can't do it on your own. You really, really need to have comrades around you, comrades of like-minded people that buoy you, give you a sense of solidarity, share their abundance when you can't just live on 2-minute noodles, and they give you some greens or some citrus. Yeah, I fully acknowledge that it's not accessible to everybody. Yeah, it's an excellent question, and you've acknowledged that it's a tricky question.
I guess maybe just to follow up with that question from Michelle, and she talks about how the bubbles that we often find ourselves in. You've spoken about you knowing who your audience was going to be for this book. I think it's a very similar audience for who comes to my Envirus Centre events. You know, it's that how sometimes really struggle with breaking down some of those boundaries and creating a diverse community where people can come together and share, you know, the diverse amounts of knowledge and experience that people have, but we do often find ourselves in these like-minded bubbles, and wonder if you have any thoughts on how to.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I get told often, you operate in a bell jar, you're full of ideology, you've got no idea. And I say, well, I mightn't, but it's how I'm living my life, and my life is full and my life is abundant, and there's a lot of people around and we're living very similarly. I would love to have a conversation with you if you've got really differing opinions. Let's sit down and see whether there's somewhere we can meet, because I have no doubt there will be lots and lots and lots of similarities that we can find. We've actually got people within our family who have pretty strong differing beliefs, but we actually have more in common than we have not. And I truly believe that most people are only doing their best, and they only want what's best for their immediate family. No one's, rarely are people actively vindictive. I strip people who are vindictive from my life, because I'm really happy to have a robust debate about ideology and values. But I've kind of got to the point where, and we used to ask this question on the pod all the time, how do you talk to people who don't believe in your beliefs? And pretty well everybody said in the end, you can't. All you can do is live your life, is show that the way you live your life, which is in deep consideration of everything around you, all living things, animals, plants, and humans, and hope that the way you live your life sparks enough curiosity in them to consider that the joyfulness of the way you live is what they want a little bit of as well. You know, I remember speaking to Robin who's the editor of Pip magazine, and she said, I just decided in the end that if I created a magazine, I could just surreptitiously leave that on coffee tables absolutely anywhere and everywhere, and people would just pick it up if they were interested, and maybe it would start to seep into their psyche. You know, Hannah Maloney, who's got a book out at the moment as well from Good Life Permaculture, I interviewed her, and she said, oh, I'm at the point where I categorically just won't have conversations with climate deniers. They're not worth having a conversation with and wasting my breath over, because there's stuff to do. There's lots of stuff to do, and we need to get on with doing it. And I work with Sustainable Table, obviously, and our whole mantra is we could take head on the conversations that, yeah, that's a good point too, Michelle. I'll come back to that. We could take conversations head on about our beliefs and what you think and what I think. But actually, we're too busy building a new system to be worried about how we're going to manage the collapse of the old one. So let's step outside. Let's just not worry about it. Michelle just made a point. Ooh, diversity outside the bubble is not just about ideology, but includes people living in very diverse circumstances, including those with disabilities, those in poverty, those facing challenges due to their skin colour or background. How do we have those conversations with more of those living in our community? Yep, man, yeah. And I interviewed someone who said, I work at a university, and we have diversity policies, and we have diversity meetings, and we have whole diversity movements, but you're only actually welcome at the table if your belief is about diversity. And so that negates all of it in the first place. And so you're right. And, you know, right now we are living one of those issues where someone within our community has a different skin colour, and someone else in our community is referring to that person with skin colour as nigger and coon. So we are stuck smack in the middle of these two very divergent realities, where one clearly doesn't understand the impact they're having, and one is devastated to the point of being unable to manage it without our help. And I tell you, it is beyond hard. We have navigated this fairly unsuccessfully for the last 6 months, and my husband's about to take it on because he has a very unemotional, level-headed ability to come at this where he sees everybody in their absolute best light and he gives everybody the benefit of the doubt. But he's taking it on because I have a tendency to get too emotional about it, and I'm too close to the individuals, and he's actually going to take it on with all of the parents of all of the parties and see if we can all come at this from an educational perspective where, you know, the kid that's clearly using words he doesn't understand the full gravity of can come to a point where he truly understands the impact he's having, and the kid that is being hurt by it all can possibly understand from the other kid's perspective that it's about cool and he doesn't really truly mean what he says. And so maybe both of them have to come to a place of compromise, and maybe it will or won't work. I don't yet know. We haven't navigated it overly successfully to date, but you're right. Yeah, including those with disabilities. That's all levels of disabilities. That's right from, you know, being on the spectrum right through to having physical disabilities. And until you're truly in their shoes, I think it's almost impossible to truly understand what their reality looks like. But I think as long as we continue to keep our humanness at the centre of the way we make decisions and the way we interact with one another, being human surely overrides anything else, because it gives you the ability to really put yourself in their shoes and be empathetic about it. And actively seeking a desire to see things from other people's perspectives is really important. It's really important, but until you're living it, it's almost impossible to truly understand it. But how do we have these conversations with more of those living within our communities? I would say have them. So I say that having just actively avoided having one for the better part of 6 months because I didn't know how to have it. But in the end, I wasn't sleeping, and I thought, I'm actually contributing to this because I'm not saying anything. I need to call this out, but I need to find a way to do it in a way that is respectful and gentle and inclusive and empathetic. But I have to have it. Otherwise, I'm in exactly the same position as the 13-year-old kid who hasn't quite worked out the impact he's having. So, yeah, how do we have them? We have to just have them. And we have to trust that being human and vulnerable and open will, for the most part, go better than having no conversation at all and putting our head in the sand and pretending it'll go away. Sometimes the bubble extends beyond the expected attendees, and those people are in the business of educating smaller people, and then your philosophy has the potential to extend exponentially. Yeah, that's right. Sorry, you're not thinking about diversity in terms of conflict, difference of lifestyle, history, access to privilege. Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's where I also think culture comes into it. I think culture has the ability to hold all of us in a place where we feel we belong the most, but it equally has the ability to teach us how to empathise with others and realise that others aren't living a lifestyle that is similar to yours. I have possibly become a bit more narrow in my thinking about how we all face into the reality of what we're facing into, and I'm not as tolerant as I used to be of people who say, I'm not interested, you live over there in organo land, I'm going to live in the city and continue to earn a lot of money because that's what I think is the most important thing. They don't necessarily, and we've got some really good friends who come from totally different backgrounds to us that we happen to stumble across at university, and, you know, our paths have diverged again, but we come together once or twice a year. And man, they are hard. They are really hard, because we go to the bush to light a fire and to paddle in the river and to look at the stars and to let our kids play spotlight. until midnight and, you know, to sleep on the ground. And they turn up with every toy known to man, and their kids don't cope when their screens don't work because we're too remote, and the kids don't cope when, you know, the food that we're serving is something that we, you know, it might have been roadkill, or it might have been an animal that we've slaughtered ourselves, or whatever it might be. We are vastly different, and that requires a huge amount of navigation, not only for us as the adults sitting around the campfire, because we just cannot agree on how the future might roll out and where we should be placing our value and how. And when I wrote this book, I had one of them in mind in particular, because I thought if they could just hold on to this book and maybe take a few kernels of wisdom about simplifying their life and redefining their enough, most importantly, because they have so much enough, it's ridiculous. There's multiple houses and multiple everythings. It's like, man, you know, you could single-handedly solve the problem of 3 of my friends who are now single mothers and can't get rental properties in this town, and they can't make ends meet. And you've got all of this, and they're both in my world. And your comment, curiosity, openness, withholding judgment to allow for respectful understanding is a start, I think. I think it's the only way we can start. We are mere humans, and we are complicated. And when we come to something, we bring our whole selves, all of our judgment, all of our previously lived experience, all of our expectation, all of the things that trigger us. So we bring our whole selves to things. And so your perspective is, of course, going to be different to mine, because the way you've lived is different to mine. And so you have to kind of understand that people bring their whole selves, and their response to things may not be as you expected, and that has to be okay. And you need to understand why their response is what it is. Great questions.
That's been some pretty engaging conversation there on some really difficult topics. So thank you for allowing the conversation to go there, and answering as well as you can with your personal experiences as well. I'm conscious that it is coming close to time. I just want to, you know, for people who are reading this book, what would be the one thing you'd want them to take away if it was just a couple of things?
The one thing, but
one, because I knew that you wouldn't be able to just stop at one, so I swapped it up.
That a sense of hope truly can sit squarely within your own capability. You can have agency of some of those foundational things, like food sovereignty, like the way in which you connect with your community, like where you find solidarity, like how you interact with others. You can have agency in all of those things, and it just requires de-shackling from what is now, sadly, the reality of the modern world, where consumption drives so many of our decisions and so much of the white noise, and I'm scooping back to it. I can't speak on behalf of others. All I can share is the story of the way we live our life. And as a storyteller, I hope that inspires others to consider pushing back on being numb and really, really waking up. And I guess the best advice I can ever give, I hate advice, but if I was to give one thing, it would be, I'll find it and I'll read it to you, because it's really how I would love my children, to grow. And I bet now I can't find it, but I talk about we are responsible for guiding our children to build a story that differs from our own. Instead of inspiring them to contribute to growth, let's create a story that builds resilience in an uncertain world, celebrates simple and is happy with less, seeks delight in the outside world and uses our imagination, understands seasonal cycles and grows our own food and can use all of it because we know what to do with it, deals with boredom creatively and makes time to discover our gifts, owns our mistakes and takes ownership of that, converses about the big issues, accepts and celebrates differences, formulates our own opinions, is confident to challenge norms, breeds individualism, and celebrates empathy and kindness. I feel like following our intuition towards that is what humans who have been portrayed for the last 20 or 30 years as being, driven by individualism is actually a whole lot of bullshit, because actually it's a very tiny, tiny blip in the existence of man. And to date, prior to that last period of time, we have survived purely because of collectivism. So we are actually intuitively collectivists. So let's find a way to get back to that.
So we've got a few hands up. So let's go to some questions.
Great. You facilitate that? Or do you want me to?
Yep. Adeline, I think your hand was up first. Go for it. Adeline, we can't hear you. You might still be on mute. Yeah, we're still not getting you, Adeline. You might need to pop your question in the chat if your microphone's not working. Caddy, though, I think also had a question. Am I right about that one? I thought somebody else had their hand up as well.
Have people got the ability to unmute themselves?
They should, yep.
Adeline's still trying to ask. Oh, technology. It would be so lovely to be in a room with everybody with a cup of tea in our hands.
Oh, sorry, she's popped in the chat there, no questions, so that might have been a accidental hands up, because we saw two flick up and then they're both gone. Sorry, yep, that was an accidental hand up. Okay, so it is coming very close. Adeline saying thank you. Awesome, inspiring talk though. I am conscious of the time, so I do want to thank you, Jade, for your time tonight. What a great conversation and some really thought-provoking topics that were covered tonight. So thank you for joining us tonight. What a shame it wasn't face-to-face, but we still managed to do it online.
I know. I really feel for you, poor buggers. You're still in lockdown. We've just come out.
Yes, lucky. There's definitely some, I think there's good reason why people seem to be leaving the urban environments at the moment and doing those tree changes. I just want to let you know about some of our upcoming events as well. So next month on Wednesday the 6th of October, we've got Brooke McCullery. She's going to be online, and so she's talking about her new book, Care. She's also the author of Slow, which you may have, and I think you've interviewed her on your podcast, haven't you, Jade?
I have, and she's interviewed me. She's gorgeous. She's really gorgeous.
She's I'm really excited about that. I've been a fan of her podcast for a long time. So her new book is about how to look after ourselves while also looking after some of these issues that we've spoken about tonight. So being involved in community, but making sure you got the self-care as well as the community and world and global care as well. So that's Wednesday the 6th of October. It is available on our website to book. And then on Wednesday the 29th of November, another person whose name popped up a little bit tonight is Hannah Maloney. And so she's going to be talking about her new book, The Good Life. Now this isn't on our website to book, but it is on Wednesday the 24th of November, and it should be up there by next week. We're just waiting on some images to do the marketing, so that will be up there very soon. So that's our last two events for the year. Wednesday 6th of October, Care with Brooke McCullery, and Wednesday the 24th of November, The Good Life with Hannah Maloney. So thank you again, Jade. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation as much as I have. Thank you for your time. I appreciate everything that you've given us tonight, and thank you to everybody else who's joined us, and we look forward to seeing you online again next month.
Thanks so much, everybody. It's really been wonderful to be here. It's a shame I'm not in person, but it's been wonderful. Thanks, Lisa, for facilitating and making it all happen. And enjoy the other two ladies. Both of them have been interviewed by me before, and actually I'm talking with Hannah again tomorrow, so she'll be on next week's pod as well for the Futuresteading pod. So yeah, get all of these good thinkers in your ears.
Yep. Okay, thank you very much. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Stay safe out there, and we look forward to seeing you either online or hopefully one day in the library soon.
Thank you.
Thank you to you both. Bye.
Thanks very much.